the Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson, and today I am very happy to welcome to the show for the very first time, JoJo Dickinson. Welcome, JoJo.
Hello. Hi, thank you for having me.
You know, you were recommended to me by Dr. Peter, who, if you're listening to the show, everybody knows who he is by now because he's been on here several times. He's done live chats and lectures and everything with this podcast. And when he reached out and recommended that I talk to you, I was immediately fascinated by the topic because I not only like the Tudors, but I've always been fascinated by different periods in time. And mostly, I'm very intrigued by women in history. And today we're going to talk about friendships. And this is an exciting topic because I think we all have friends. We all understand friendships, but the definition of friendship has kind of changed over time. And I think that's where I want to start because you're looking at 18th century friendships between women, correct?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Between 1660 and 1800. So I'm cheekily classifying it as the long 18th century, but I realize that is very controversial and that will probably cause a few.
Well, let's start off because when we look at friendships today, right, we can be friends with whomever we want. You know, we'll accept any consequences that come with having that friendship, but it wasn't the same for these women, was it?
No, absolutely not. There was definitely a lot more pressure over who you could be friends with and the impact this could have. I think reputation plays a big aspect in this. So, and class especially, you know, for many people, women, you wouldn't have wanted to be seen with the wrong person because of the scandal that would have caused. I mean, I hate to bring Bridgerton and shows like that into this, but you know, we see examples of that in Bridgerton. You know, it being associated with the wrong person, like the wrong friend, can cause scandal amongst, you know, the rest of the aristocracy in particular.
Let's unpack that a little bit because I'd like to understand, first of all, what got you interested in this topic? Was there a certain person or a friendship that did it, or?
It's very odd actually how I got into it. It was through my master's degree. I did a module all about 18th century history and we were reading conduct literature. And it was John Gregory's work. It was just a passage from his work and he mentioned about friendship and marriage. So I wrote a whole dissertation for my master's to do with how conduct literature controlled ideas of marriage and friendship. And then I always knew I wanted to do a PhD. So when I was considering topics, I was like, actually, there's not many people talk about friendship, and I found this when I was doing the research for the master's dissertation. When I was looking through secondary, yes, everyone was talking about marriage and what conduct literature was saying for that, but no one really spoke about female friendship in particular. Obviously, there was a lot of talk about male friendship and the importance of that, but female friendship rarely got a look in. So I decided to change that and started looking at more conduct literature and. Yeah, so it's kind of gone from there and then it's developed into looking through letters and diaries and yeah, there is a lot more material than I think people realize.
I was just gonna ask too, and you were talking about that, like what kind of material are you researching in order to discover how these friendships were or to see behind the curtain, so to speak?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So how I've kind of done it is I've taken the conduct literature and taken what ideas of friendship were, and then I've gone, but hang on a minute, these were ideas. These weren't necessarily being followed. So then I've taken the diaries and the letters of women such as Lady Mary Coke, Mary Wortley Montagu, and gone, this is what's actually happening. I realised, you know, I've only picked a small group of women, so it's you know, I don't have time to look at every single woman in the 18th century. So it's a small look in, but I think it's quite an insightful look in to how these dynamics work.
What kind of things did you find in these letters that pointed toward these friendships?
So There's two sets of women in particular, Elizabeth Carter and Catherine Talbot. They were the one group of like two women that I managed to get a back and forth correspondence of their friendship. And their friendship's very interesting because you've got a nice mix where they've clearly also interact with each other in person, but it's mainly through letters. And we actually see their whole friendship from the very beginning all the way up until Catherine Talbot sadly passes away, and we see the ending of that friendship. And it's very interesting to see how they became friends. They became friends through a mutual acquaintance. They both then became members of the Blue Stocking Circle. And through there, I I interpreted it as Catherine Talbot, she was a bit younger than Elizabeth Carter, so I think Elizabeth Carter essentially took her under her wing and was like, it was meant to almost start as a mentor, but a really lovely friendship bloomed from that. And I think you definitely see that in a letter that's written just after Catherine Talbot's died, and Elizabeth Carter notes that she was present literally an hour before Catherine Talbot died, so she was at the house and left an hour before she died, and it's a very sad, it's a gut-wrenching letter. It's like, oh, and I think we don't see that side of women all that often. I'm not just saying in the 18th century, but generally we don't see that side to women where they show so much emotion. And you can tell she is absolutely devastated by this friendship. Like, the loss of Catherine Talbot.
It seems like being a woman in the past, I'm going to exclude present day because I feel like it's so different now, but being a woman in the past seems like such an isolating place to be.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, all the rules and I think expectations surrounding how they have to behave. So I think when they do express those emotions on paper, especially in a letter, they are sending it to people that they choose to trust, that they know they can be themselves, or very similar to almost our modern idea of friendship, where you have a select group of people that you can be yourself with, and you're not having to kind of hide behind, almost a persona. And the fact that she expresses these emotions, even the letters that they exchange, during their friendship, they are definitely talking about stuff that they would be hesitant to almost talk about possibly with other women. So, they're expressing their political views, which, would have been already a rather controversial thing for them to be doing. Catherine Talbot, she discusses the Marriage Act and how she thinks it's wrong and the impact this is going to have on the lower classes. Unfortunately, we don't get Elizabeth Carter's views, but I think from the fact that Catherine Talbot feels she can discuss this, it gives an idea as to probably what the Catherine, yeah.
They probably had similar views, right?
Yeah, Elizabeth Carter was probably thinking the same thing.
Yeah. How different though I guess in a way, so I'm going to contradict myself because I was just thinking like to put something like that in writing, it seems like a dangerous thing, but nowadays I guess we do the same thing with text messaging or emailing, don't we?
Yeah, 100%. Again, it's coming back to, there are some things that I would say to other people that I'm really close to, and then when I'm, contacting other people like at work, the tone is very different. I think it very much depends on the nature of that relationship or friendship. I think that's very important. But interesting enough, another thing I look at is diary entries, and that is obviously completely different because the assumption is that they would never be read. And the comments that are made about friendship by Lady Mary Coke in particular about some of her friends it's some pretty mean stuff. She can be really kind, but other times she can just flip, and she's got nicknames for some of her friends, not the nicest of nicknames, but yeah, she doesn't hold. It's very interesting, the contrast. I go from very lovely examples of friendship to all of a sudden very sort of questionable examples.
I think that's like human nature, right? Because
Yes.
we tend to maybe censor ourselves a little bit in everyday life, but when we're journaling or keeping a diary, that's when we can be 100% honest.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And I think for Lady Mary Coke, as far as she was concerned, the only people that would ever read her diaries was her sisters, and unfortunately for her, that has not been the case. um, I've gone through that entire diary, and yeah, she's probably my favorite woman that I've looked at. Again, I think many people might disagree with me on that one. I think she's interesting. She's not afraid to say what she thinks.
Can you give us a little idea of her background so we understand like who she was?
Yeah, of course. So she is an interesting one. So she's very much a member of the aristocracy, but she is not the most popular of women within that group. So she was a lady in waiting to Queen Anne and Caroline, the Princess of Wales. So that's and she very much loves to talk about the fact that she's a lady in waiting. Any chance she gets to mention that she was with the Princess of Wales, she's mentioning it. And she was so pretty much throughout the whole diary, she is widowed. But prior to this, with her marriage, it's quite we don't know too much about the marriage. All we really know is that her husband very much kept her isolated. She was pretty much cut off from society until he died. I think their marriage was about and it was a very short-lived marriage, luckily for Mary Coke. So the sense I've always gotten is her husband died, and then she was only in her early 20s when this happened. The impression I've always gotten is she suddenly got this sense of freedom, and I feel like you can see that in the diary. She's going out, she's going to ball, she's coming back at 2-3 o'clock in the morning. She is staying there until the very end to gamble. She loves gambling. She comments on near enough every diary entry when she goes out that she lost 2 or 3 guineas. She gets quite upset about this often. Doesn't like it when other people cheat when she is gambling. But she is also known she has a bit of a rivalry with Emma Hamilton, which is really odd. It's unfortunate. We've only got one letter where it's an exchange between the two women, and it seems like they get along quite in the early days of their friendship. Annoyingly, we don't know what happened between the events of this particular letter and the start of the diary entries, where all of a sudden Emma Hamilton is enemy number one. Anytime they're in the same room together, she comments. She's quite a paranoid lady, I think. She thinks people are talking about her when, we'll never know whether they were, but she says, "Oh, Emma Hamilton said this about my dress, but the princess reassured me that wasn't the case." She likes to have one up on.
It's really interesting. Okay, so then it made me wonder too, like, were they in a disagreement over a man that they both wanted? Was Emma Hamilton married at the time? Do you know?
She was married. The letter's really weird because I think it was written just after her husband had died, and Emma Hamilton's almost encouraging Mary to go seek another husband. She's like, I can't remember the name of the man, but she's basically saying, look, we found this suitor. He's interested in you. Why don't you go see how it goes? And like I said, annoyingly, we don't get the correspondence back. But I would love to know what must have happened between now and then, because she never remarries. Lady Mary Coke stays a widow for the rest of. So the marriage obviously doesn't work. She never gets married again. But yeah, there is a sense that they were definitely friends, and something must have happened for her to all of a sudden just say no. We're not friends anymore. It's really odd.
Yeah, if only we had more information. But I was thinking too, like this her diary, she really thought probably that nobody else was ever going to look at this. How did this go from being her private possession to now being something the public can look at?
So I'm not entirely sure how it came about that the public can now view it. I think from what I could gather when I was reading sort of the introduction to the diary, a lot of stuff seemed to have been cut, which given some of what I've read, I can imagine there was a bit more, a few bits of damning.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a strange diary, like in how she she writes, I will give her credit. She keeps up every single day. There is notes of what she's done, and she does it, and she's got very good structure. She mentions what she does in the day, then in the evening, and if she can get a bit of gossip in, she'll throw it in. Because obviously, I think, as far as she was concerned, only her sisters were ever gonna read that. No one else needed to. But I find it interesting when she talks about gossip, she refers to it as news. Never mentions the word gossip, won't refer to it as that. And it wasn't like the word didn't exist. I think she just wanted to come across like she wasn't just going to these events to get.
Yeah. Well,
When.
it's funny that you say news because I remember in the Tudor period, Elizabeth, before she was queen, mentioning something about London news. And that was a way of saying the gossip around town. And so I'm glad that you said that because that statement had been around for a long time.
Yeah, she says often, she's like, oh, I got some news. And even there is a brief example where even Elizabeth Carter and Catherine Talbot say, oh, I have news to tell you, and you read what this news is, and it's gossip.
What a nice way to say gossip, isn't it?
Yeah, I was like, that's such a polite way of phrasing about the fact you're gossiping, basically.
I love it. You guys always have like the most polite way to say things.
Just made me chuckle. I was like, and I did a word search of how often Mary Cogan particularly uses the word news, and it is a lot. And I'm like, yeah, you're just gossiping with people, and she loves it.
Yeah, that's what you imagine, right? When it comes to that time period, if we're looking, let's say the 17th, 18th, maybe even 19th century, you just imagine these women, whether they were single or married, in these rooms, sitting around tables, playing cards or knitting or whatever it might be, and just gossiping.
That is exactly it. And I think I feel like we got Jane Austen a little bit to blame for that, because there was example, even in Pride and Prejudice, I think a few chapters in, after they've been to the first ball, and the first thing they do the following morning, Elizabeth and her family, they all go to her friend's house and they discuss what had happened the night before. They're like, Jane danced with this person, and but Charlotte Lucas, she only danced with him once. Jane got all the dances with this person, with Bingley, and it's like a competition. And yeah, I think, and we see examples of that in generally in female friendship, where they come around to talk and share news, and they are sat around a tea table. So to me, part of what I wanted to do was take away this idea of the stereotype of women, 18th century women, sitting around and drinking tea and spending their afternoons gossiping with each other, which I was somewhat able to do, but not. There were definitely examples. But yeah, so, and the tea table, I think, you see satire images of women sat around tea tables. I think they become associated with as almost like a prime object of female friendship, and tea in general, I think.
Yeah, that's where the spill the tea came from, right?
Yes. They were literally spilling the tea.
And there's such a difference then, as you're talking about this, I compare it to modern day too, but the difference between female friendships and male friendships.
Yes.
I don't imagine men sitting around talking about who danced with who. And
no, they don't. Well, I mean, some of them might have cared about it. I don't think all of them did. I like the idea that maybe we do get some snippets where there are men also present, and they offer the odd remark, and it's like, see, you do kind of care. No, I would say the difference is male friendship. I feel like there's no pressure. There is no pressure for men on who they're friends with. They can talk about what they want. They can do what they want. It doesn't matter who they're seen with, within reason. But yeah, very much less pressure. Whereas women, it's make sure they got virtuous traits. If they have a bad reputation, you don't want to be seen with them because they might ruin yours. Secrecy was important. John Gregory, he makes a comment in his work, if a friend isn't willing to keep your secrets, they're not a true friend, which I think is a reasonable statement. That was one of the few statements I read when I was researching. I was like, no, that's a reasonable piece of advice. there were other questionable bits of advice, but that was reasonable.
Yeah, yeah.
But for men, when I was looking at definitions of friendship for them, it's very different. It's almost encouraged that they go and befriend who they want, and yeah, no boundaries. Go befriend
Yeah.
everybody. As long as they have some sort of, benefit, go be friends.
Yeah, I was just going to say that too with the men,
Mm,
because the men ruled society essentially. It was all
yes.
about networking and connecting for them in
Yeah.
particular.
You definitely see that in someone like Samuel Pepys' diaries. He like when he's with his friends and they discuss business and they discuss politics. And then there's a real contrast when he mentions what Elizabeth was doing with her friends. As soon as Elizabeth, one of her female friends, enters the picture, it's, oh, we sat down and played cards, but it's never mentioned what they actually discussed. They just played cards. The discussion was obviously not as important.
Or one that they didn't wish to put in
Yeah,
writing.
all that as well.
You can just imagine some of the things that they might have discussed that we just will never know.
Oh, especially like someone like Samuel Pepys. I can only imagine what.
Yeah. In your research, was there anything that you read in these letters or diaries where you were like, "Ooh, that's some juicy stuff right there"?
Ooh, I'm gonna try and find it. There was one that I was thinking of.
I was like, there has to be something out there where you were kind of shocked or surprised.
The thing that surprised me the most was one of the nicknames that Mary gives one of her friends. Because, and I had to look up the definition of this just to like the 18th century definition. And when you read the definition of it, it's like, okay, maybe it was meant as friendly, but definitely from a 21st century perspective, I think we would all be a bit like, that's a bit rude. You can't call someone that. She refers to one of her friends as her fat friend. Yeah, and I read this, and even my supervisor, she was like, "Are you sure she said this?" I was like, "I am 100% sure she called her friend fat."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we had to double check. She did not believe me at first. And I was like, "No, I promise you, she did."
I thought maybe you were going to say she called her friend a cow or something. So
Hey, this is what I went in when I first started this research. I thought, oh, maybe that's the kind of like stuff that's going to come up. I was not expecting that the word fat would come up at all as a as a nickname. Yeah, she writes, um, she says, "Oh, my fat friend says she will take great care of my letters and send them to your house as soon as she arrives." So she's referring to Lady Spencer, who was Mary Beauclerk. I can never pronounce some of these.
I understand.
So I was like, okay, I'll have a look at what the definition of fat was. And when I had a look, it's the definition of fat during this period was of a person or animal or part of the body well nourished, well fed, desirably or attractively plump. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe from her perspective, she's complimenting her, so I had to kind of justify it and ignore my 21st century mind of that is not a compliment.
Right.
When I was writing it. So I was like, okay, so in her mind, it's a lovely comment to make, which and I shouldn't have been surprised because it's Mary Coke and she's, like I said, not afraid to say what she thinks. But yeah, that was one of the most shocking bits because generally both me and my supervisor looked at it and thought, there's no, like we had to double check it to make sure that is, and I hadn't just mistyped
Right.
it.
Yeah. Like, did I really see what I just saw?
Yeah, I had to go back and I was like, that was not what I was expecting."
Oh, that's a great little piece of history. Was
Yes.
was there anything, and I don't know why my mind went here right away. Was there anything like in the letters or in her or in diaries that you discovered where they were talking about people having an affair or anything like that?
I wish there was. This is what I went in looking for because I was such being nosy and I was hoping there would be notes, but no, even Lady Mary Coke is cautious not to discuss anything to do with it. I mean, that's as cautious as she gets. She's not afraid to talk about anything else, but anything to do with affairs, she just doesn't. Yeah, they don't seem to want to talk about any of those. Even in the letters where they're clearly friends that they trust, she doesn't mention. They talk about the royal family, But even then, it's not. I don't know if it's because they're in quite close. So especially someone like Lady Mary, she's she's quite close with the Princess of Wales. She's hesitant sometimes, I think, because she is very much a social climber and she wants to maintain.
Mm.
But yeah, unfortunately, no, they're very, very cautious about talking about that, which is a shame in a sense.
Yes. Well, we want all of the gossip. We
I
want.
This is what I went in looking for, and I found none.
I know. I always joke about how I don't want drama in my own life, so I go looking for it in other places.
Yeah, I searched high low. I even was like when I was looking at work on assembly rooms, I thought this is where the gossip's going to be. If anything's going to happen, it's going to be the assembly rooms. But even then, their main comments are about who danced with who and who wore what, and yeah, it's very important, like who they interact with. But yeah, no one talks about affairs.
Okay, you mentioned assembly rooms. What do you mean when you say, I mean, is it exactly how it sounds?
So it's pretty much exactly how it sounds. It was rooms that basically they were designed to promote social interaction amongst the community. To an extent. And I say to an extent because there were events that would only be exclusively for the aristocracy and you'd have to buy tickets but they were very much the place to be seen. If you were going to be seen anywhere, you wanted to be at these assembly halls mingling with the correct people. And unfortunately, again, I know I keep referring back to Lady Marycoat, but she is present at them the most. Any opportunity she gets, she's at an assembly.
She finds a way to be involved in these things, doesn't she?
Oh, no matter what, if she is going to be there.
It sounds like she's the gossip queen.
Yeah, I read an article about her a few months ago, and actually someone referred to her as the real life Lady Whistledown, which I found really, and I was like, no, she is Lady Whistledown, basically.
It makes you wonder if that's who inspired the character.
I thought maybe it was her, because yeah, she just loves picking up on. I don't think she herself likes to be involved. I think I describe her more as an observer that tries not to get involved, but she kind of can't help herself.
Yeah. Well, now I'm curious because this is a period in history that I haven't really studied. Was there something similar to Lady Whistledown's little pamphlet that would go out? Was there something similar that would float around court?
Not similar. Newspapers, depending on which ones you were reading, they were not afraid to discuss what was happening, especially if anything significant happened at these balls. And there is one incident that even Lady Mary talks about in relation to clothes that had been worn. There was a masquerade that had happened. I can't remember the theme of the costuming, but something quite awful happened to one of the women's costumes. And I say awful, I think she just matched someone else. But during that period, that was enough to be considered a tragedy, quite frankly.
Right.
And even Lady Mary Coat comments on it, and she goes, "Oh, must have been incredibly embarrassing for them, to be wearing the same costume as each other." And I just remember reading and being like, "It's not them," But some newspapers pick up on it. A lot of them don't. I think it very much depends on the nature of. But yeah, even then, there's not a big. There's satire. There's definitely, there's images made, but that's more so people just kind of mocking people, like the tea table satire that goes around where we're mocking women for sitting around and drinking tea.
Yeah. I just imagine, nowadays, if we go to an event and let's say one of your girlfriends is wearing the exact same outfit as you, it's not as devastating for most people. And it's like, this is a photo opportunity. Let's take a picture together.
Most people would just laugh it off. They would find it hilarious. But I guess the difference is like where your reputation and I don't want to say popularity, but almost is being seen as sort of the best of the best. That was even more important back then, especially depending on your family networks and who you were associated with. Because if you embarrass yourself, you're not just embarrassing yourself, you're embarrassing your family. And you don't want to do that. You don't want your family to, be ashamed of you for wearing the same outfit as somebody else.
Right. And I would suspect, we have a lot more clothing options now, right? So if it happens now, it's kind of a funny coincidence.
Yeah.
But back then, I would think that the clothing options weren't as great. But also, I guess I'm kind of surprised that there would be similar outfits available. Like I always just imagine everything was custom made.
Yeah, so obviously, unfortunately, I don't get like an insight as to how similar the outfit was, but I don't know if maybe they went as the same sort of like character, because I think it was they were dressing up as different. I took it as they were going as the same character, but
Okay.
again, it was, it was, oh dear, someone's gone as the same
Oh
same
no.
person, and someone didn't get the memo.
Yeah, such a
Very
tragedy.
upsetting.
Jeez. So we've talked a lot about Mary Cook and some of her friends. Were there other women who came up in your research where you found some interesting information as well?
Lady Mary Wortley Montagu comes up often. Her friendships are interesting, especially have the one example where we have a back and forth correspondence. It's only a very small portion of letters, but I find their friendship interesting just because of what happened after. So again, it's a similar situation where Anne Wortley, she passed away quite early on in their so we've only got a small handful of letters, but from what we see in their letters, they are very close friends. They are constantly giving each other advice, especially ironically about letter writing. They write letters to each other, advising them on letter writing, and they always say to each other like, "Oh, I hope you found my letter entertaining, and was this the right thing?" Which just made me chuckle because I thought, if you're sending letters to each other, I'm sure you're doing the right thing. But she died in 1710, and then Mary actually went on to marry her brother Edward. Yeah, it was a very quick.
What?
And I don't know how true this is. There's a theory that Edward, again, I've got no evidence to prove that this might be true or not. There's a theory that Edward guided Anne on what to write in her letter so he could find out more about Mary. So there's this idea that he was always somewhat interested in Mary, but bless him, didn't have the just didn't have the confidence. So he used the letters through Anne. So then you read back over the letters after finding this out, and you can see snippets of where, okay, this looks like a genuine friendship, but then there's some like jarring bits where it's like, is this a bit of like, she asked a lot of questions, and I think, is that Edward asking those and not Anne? But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, when Anne dies, Mary doesn't leave a similar letter like what Elizabeth Carter did. She's not expressing how heartbroken she is. If anything, I don't know if that's because we're missing letters, but it makes me chuckle because then there's suddenly a jump and she's on an embassy trip. She's married to Edward now. And it's like, oh, I doubt this happened that.
Wow. So how
Yeah.
did her marriage turn out with Edward? Was it a happy marriage? I'm curious.
Yeah, it seems to be a very happy marriage. They had 2 children, they went on embassy, and the letters that she writes to her friends during those is really interesting because I always joke saying she basically shows off. She's telling all her friends, "Oh, I've done this and this and this." And what I do find the most interesting is, so she will essentially write the same letter to all her friends, but there'll be different like things that she's excluded or included in each individual letter. So I think she almost tries to cater to what she knows her friends would be interested in. So there's one where she writes loads about a church, and then in a similar letter dated on the same day, she's talking about that she's gone to go get this particular friend something that she was asking her to go fetch when she was. And she's like, I've got you the silks that you wanted.
Oh, I love that. I love how it still seems like they were these strong female relationships that these women could rely on each other.
Yeah, I think that's almost what we're kind of missing from the narrative of women's history. I think we focus so much on men, men's history, and I feel we look at male friendships, but we don't look at them as friendships. We look at them as like political partners, business partners, but we never look at them as friendships. Whereas we look at women, and I think we have almost an idea that, yeah, they associate themselves with each other, but I don't think we ever actually look at them as friends. I think annoyingly we just sort of look at them as the wives of the men that are friends, and it's like no, they're friends. Like I think we have this assumption that they see each other at these events and that's it. Then
Right.
they just go home and they don't see each other until the next event.
Yeah. Yeah. I really appreciate this research that you're doing into this. Like I've said, like it's something we don't talk about.
Yeah, it's like I part of my research. I for one of the chapters I look at, I even briefly touch on friendship in the Tudor period. I look at Elizabeth the First and trying to find and Blanche Parry very, very briefly because it's not my area. So it's a very brief, you know, I don't want to delve into something that I didn't know
Yeah.
too much about. But even their friendship, you know, their lady, you know, she's a lady in waiting, but they were friends for so long that the level of trust that the two women must have had with each other. And I just think it's a narrative that we sort of tend to gloss over. I don't think we think about. We talk about ladies in waiting, but we don't talk about them as friends.
Yeah. When you said that, you reminded me of the friendship between Catherine Parr and Catherine Willoughby
Mm.
and how close those two women were. And they were close enough that after Catherine Parr died and her husband was imprisoned, her husband sent their daughter to live with Catherine Willoughby. Like, if there's anybody I'm going to trust, it's this woman that my wife trusted
Yeah,
implicitly.
yeah. I think it's the same, you know, like godmothers, and I briefly discussed the significance of that. You know, your trust. If you name a woman to be the godmother of your child, you are trusting. If something happens to you, you're trusting that woman to basically look after your child. And I
Yeah.
just there has to be a level of trust and, you know, closeness to trust, you know, have someone look up, you know, with the responsibility of your child.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Jojo, I really enjoyed this conversation with you today. Is there anything that I may have missed that you covered in your research that you just want to make sure that everybody knows about?
Um, I mean, a lot of my research also looks at female spaces. So the importance, like the idea that I mean, one of my chapters looks at the home in particular, and actually I label kind of which rooms were considered female spaces of friendship, and the drawing room and the dining room come up a lot in particular. Um, I think they're quite, again, I'm going back to things like the tea table and stuff, you know, they're not only drinking tea in those rooms, they're having, you know, they're having dinners with their husbands, and there's talk, you know, they have talks about politics and, you know, again, sorry to bring her back up. Lady Mary Coke, ironically, as much as she loves gossip, she loves politics as well. She, she likes, so, um, I think, sorry, I'm trying to find the bit that I'm after.
Well, there's so many interesting friendships that you've been researching, isn't there?
Yeah, and they have a discussion about, you know, politics, and Lady Mary Coke notes to the woman and her husband that she's going to have dinner with. She notes how she's going to attend Parliament tomorrow with some of the other women that are
Oh,
interested, and yeah, so they very much get involved, and I just want to make it clear that, you know, the home isn't just a place where, you know, women go home and they tend to their families. The home was also a space where women came together to, you know, discuss the day, you know, day's events and discuss life in general. And, you know, we see images such as Catherine Talbot, no, Catherine Carr, Elizabeth Carter and Catherine Talbot, you know, in the last few hours of Catherine's life, Elizabeth is there. She is at her home taking care of her friend in literally her last few hours. So I
yeah.
think, you know, I don't want it to be a place where the home isn't just a place for families. There's friendships that surround it as well.
Right. And it is so true that your home is generally your safe place.
Yes, and I think this is definitely an example of that. I think we see examples where the women are definitely not are more open about what they say. They're not. Whereas when we look at like a public space, they're having to be a bit more cautious about what they say to their friends.
Yeah. Did you notice if there were any friendship circles where some friends were closer than other, I'm trying to think of it as an example. When there's three female friends that are together, there's always one that seems to get pushed out a little bit. Did you see any of that?
There is an example of that, and it's when they are. There's a good example of this when they're gambling. there's one instant where it gets very, very, a little bit heated. Um, sorry, just trying to find that again.
Yeah, can't wait to hear about this.
Again, it was one of those where I read it and I had to reread it a few times just to be sure that what I had read was correct, because I was a bit like, oh, okay. So again, it's Mary Coke. She's with the Duchess of Argyll and Mrs. Young. So Mrs. Young, annoyingly, there's two Mrs. Young, so it's been trying to work out who is who. In this case, I think it's possibly her cousin, but she's there a lot, and as is the Duchess of Argyll. So this is at the Duchess's home, and they're gambling with each other, and she writes, at 7 was told the tea was ready and obliged to attend it. When that was over, set down to quadrille, played with uncommon ill luck, lost 5 sandpatrons, and the Duchess scolded Mrs. Young so much that she made her cry. And when I feel bad for Mrs. Young because this happens a lot. Especially when they're gambling. And I'm like, either she's got really bad luck, or I don't think she's as I think unfortunately she is that friend that gets kind of pushed aside a little bit. So when stuff I did feel bad. I had to read it a few times. I was like, oh, poor Mrs. Young.
Yeah. That is so common. And it's funny because I have young nieces, and I've told them before when they've talked to me about friendship issues. And, just to reassure them, like, this happens. You know what? Whenever there are 3 people who call themselves best friends, there are always 2 that tend to connect better. It's just how it is. And it's hard. As a kid, I was in a very similar situation with 2 other girlfriends when I was in an elementary school, and I was probably like 11 years old. And I remember thinking these 2 are like my best friends in the whole entire world, but they were closer together than I was with any of them. And that was hard. That was painful, but they were also my friends.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that, and we always, we all reassure each other in this day and age. It's all about, reassuring, and I can't say the same in this example. There's no reassuring. They sort of, she cries, and then they just carry on as if nothing, it seems to be that they just carry on as if nothing happened. And obviously, I mean, I say that they might have been a bit of reassurance. Mary Coke tends to not go into too much detail unless she herself finds it exciting. But I would like to think there was some reassurance, but I'm not that optimistic when it comes to Lady Mary Coke about that.
Female friendships are tricky sometimes, but when you can find a female who you can trust, there's nothing like it.
Exactly. And I'm glad that at least there are, if not many, there are some a few examples of that. It's not all catty, and there are some genuine friendships in there.
I love this. JoJo, thank you so much for coming on today and talking about these friendships with me.
No, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Hope you enjoyed it.
If anybody wants to reach out to you with some questions that they have, maybe from the show today, how can they find you?
You can find me on X at Dickinson_JoJo.
Perfect. So if you were watching or listening today and I didn't ask a question that came into your head, please feel free. You can either reach out to me or you can reach out to JoJo. If you reach out to me, I'll make sure that she gets your message, and we'll go from there. But JoJo, thank you again. And I look forward to congratulating you in the future on your PhD.
Thank you so much.
And that concludes another episode of the Tudors Dynasty podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you love the show and would like to show your support, consider becoming a patron over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty. Over there, you'll get commercial-free episodes, early access, and some patron-exclusive content as well. If you would prefer to show your support in another way, head on over to my website, tudorsdynasty.com, and click on the shop to see some of the new merchandise that I have available. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.